So I'm Olivier Buisard. I created Simplify Web 2.5 years ago. I come from France, and I've been studying in Chicago and worked in Chicago for 10 years before returning to France for 6, and now I'm back. And decided to go on my own after working for different companies. I'm a computer engineer, so I'm kind of hands-on with the code. I mainly work for people who want to move their old websites into Joomla websites and give them more freedom to go into updating their own content. And along the way, I created a few extensions and templates that I use extensively on my websites, and I made available for people in the Joomla extension directory. Some are free, some are commercial. When it comes to jQuery, there's a hard truth until at least Joomla 2.5. People get very excited about downloading modules that do a lot of things, especially if they give the user, the end user, visual effects and great interactions. And more modules use jQuery extensively. Modules, applications, components, and plugins. So the more you download and the more you add your modules into your Joomla website, you get into some problems along the way, especially if you have extensions that don't really pay attention about having jQuery loaded already, or having MooTools loaded and are unaware of it, or simply if the code is poorly written. I don't know, for people who are not very familiar with jQuery, MooTools use the $ as a way of using variables and stuff. And jQuery is also using the $ for aliasing the word jQuery. So when both are in the same page and use the same $, then you have conflicts. The code doesn't understand if you are actually using jQuery or if you're using MooTools.
So that relates to variable definitions?
Not only variables. I mean, creation of functions and stuff like that. Yes. Also, you have components that require jQuery, and they load their own jQuery library. The problem is that you may have another component that also does the same thing. And then you may end up having a website having a a mess of a code with different jQuery library loaded, MooTools loaded, different similar jQuery library loaded, or different versions of the jQuery loaded. So you get into a bit of a mess. I'll show you a little example to give you an idea. My French come back. Ooh la la. This is a very simple website I created with just 4 extensions. I wanted to use K2. I don't know if you're familiar with K2. It's a pretty nice way of entering articles into your Joomla framework. I loaded K2. K2 is going to load this jQuery library, and it's load its own K2 code. I also downloaded a wonderful gallery that allows me to show my pictures. It's responsive. It can work on my mobile phones and stuff. It's very interesting. I have jQuery loaded here, but I have no idea what version. I also put a couple of my modules, and it's actually loading from a library, an external library, jQuery. And then I get a little of everything. I have some no conflict code here, The no conflict code is the code that you can add to a page so that two libraries don't conflict with each other. But you just don't need to put it only once. I mean, you don't need that many times. And then see, here you have my template that loads some MooTools code here and some MooTools code here. I mean, it's like all over the place. That's the result. I'm going to try and show you. That's the website I created. The gallery is loaded. I don't see my Cat2A articles, but it's behind. I have a few modules, and I have pagination here. It's been loaded with jQuery. And I'm lucky. I'm looking into the Firebug console. Firebug, which is a tool that's very efficient to try and find errors in your code. There's no errors. I got lucky. Even though the code is a mess. OK, I'll try to go down. Not very familiar with this. OK, what can I do? Oh, excuse me. What can I do now to try to avoid these problems? One thing I can do, I mean, the one thing I should start and think of is check the extension itself. I know that gallery is loading jQuery and K2 is loading jQuery. Is there a way to disable it from the extension itself? Well, it turns out that K2 allows me to do that. You can go in the parameters of K2 and you can disable or enable jQuery and even decide if you want a local version or a version that's loaded from a site like Google. That's perfect. Then I can do some cleaning. And I do it right with this. All right. Well, what next? What if I cannot find any other way of turning off jQuery in those other modules or components that have it loaded? Well, I created a tool that allows you to do that, and it's called jQuery Easy. jQuery Easy is just a plugin, but it's really not the ultimate Mr. Clean. You can fix a lot of your problems with jQuery, but you may have to still put your hands in it. And hopefully not too much. Although I've seen a few websites, people would have problems with their website, telling me their problems, giving me the URL link, and I would find out that the website is just a Christmas tree with animations here and there, and crazy. And the nice thing about jQuery is that you disable it, it won't break your site. If it's enabled and you break your site, that means that there are errors that are too difficult for a plugin to fix by itself without human interaction. But if you really have to go back to your website, there's no problem. You just disable the plugin.
Should that say not going to break your site permanently?
It's not going to.
Oh, it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Basic settings. Well, for people who don't know anything about coding or jQuery, it's the one thing that's interesting is that as soon as you enable jQuery or jQuery UI, some people don't know that they don't have to do it. jQuery UI is only required for some components or modules and it's rarely asked for. But when you enable jQuery and you put a right version, that's all you have to do. it moves your MooTools libraries in front of the jQuery calls. It only adds a jQuery library, the one that you've chosen, and remove all the ones that are duplicates, and adds the no conflict code so that jQuery and MooTools can work together. Most of the time, it works right from that.
I was going to ask, does JavaScript work, in terms of talking about these conflicts, does it work the same way as CSS does, in that the last written command or whatever is what gets paid attention to?
Yes, it does, but
so that's by putting MooTools ahead of jQuery, you ensure that it's always the jQuery commands that's taken.
Actually, I've read articles about it, and it turns out that it doesn't matter if jQuery is before or after MooTools, as long as you have the jQuery no conflict code just after your jQuery library.
Oh, okay.
So I made the choice to always have MooTools first and jQuery after, but it didn't have to be that case, as long as the no conflict code is there. Well, how do you find out how you choose your version of jQuery? Because it's not very easy. I mean, you have seen in the example, and I'm going to show you the code. Yes, a website down here. Here. A good thing with Firefox, for example, you can click on the code and see what's behind it. So if you have, I don't know where my mouse is. All right. So if I look, for example, this jQuery, I didn't have an idea of what the version was, but by clicking on it, I may be able to find out. Oh, in luck, it's jQuery 1.3, 8.3. And I have this one. The Google API loads 1.8, but it's always the latest version. So latest version is 1.8.3, it turns out. And this one, this module is also loading 1.7.2. I mean, look, when I look at the website, on the jQuery website, I can find out that usually between 1.7 and 1.8, there are not many changes. And so my code most likely is going to work with 1.8.
But if you had something like 1.6, God forbid, and it may break with 1.8.
Yeah, it may break. So then usually I tell the people to go and talk with the developer of that extension and see what could be done for that module to be updated to 1.8.
No, I would say jQuery has excellent backwards compatibility.
Usually does. Yeah. Until 1.8. You want to avoid between 1.5 and 1.8, but 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, it's pretty much, the code is usually working. When it comes to 1.9 and 1.10, then it becomes a little more difficult, but there are tools for help.
And what happens if somebody has actually gone to the jQuery 2?
Well, that's the prime is mostly browser compatibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
jQuery 2 basically cuts out Internet Explorer 8.
Then less.
Yes, 6, 7, and 8 are not.
But is there a big difference? Like if I've got an extension that's written newer and somebody decided they wanted to go 2.
Yeah, there is a big difference between 1.8 and 2.0, for example. But there is a little extra library you can download and put in there called Migrate. And it actually makes sure that the old code works with the new code.
Okay. I think I've heard that actually. I've read it somewhere.
Actually, it's now in Joomla 3.2.
Oh, cool.
So I've seen now that I can decide that my version is going to be 1.8. And I'm saying the latest versions, that means that I'm going to get the latest of the 1.8 branch. In jQuery, if you go higher than 1.8, then you have to specify the subversion. Google has stopped making available latest versions of a branch. So if you use 1.8, you get the latest. If you use 1.9, you have to specify if you want 0, 1, 2, etc. Well, when not all goes well, you have the possibility to go in fine-tuning and try different things. You have one first option. It's replace jQuery when it's unique. What I mean by that is that sometimes you have a page that just loads one version of jQuery. So you don't want to mess with that page. So you tell the plugin, just don't replace that only version of jQuery with mine. You can also tell the plugin not to add jQuery to pages that don't have it in the first place. You may not want to have the library loaded when you don't need it. The plugin also can do a little too much. In trying to remove all the jQuery libraries, you can remove extra files that you don't want it to remove. For example, the underlying code is pretty much regular expressions, and it's very hard to try and find the ultimate one that will remove everything. So if you have the bad luck to have jQuery in your file, JavaScript file, you will have it removed. So what you can do is add in this box the scripts you want to ignore to be removed. And then when you go through your code, you may have some scripts you don't want. It turns out that they make errors and they are not very useful. It turns out sometimes it happens. So you can strip remaining script. You can also do that with CSS. And then you can mess a little bit with this conflict code. You can strip it or not. And you can decide that you want it as a, instead of having as a script, which is the default, have it as a script declaration. So you have it in your code directly in the page, or instead of being a file. And there are a few more tools. You can also, I'm going to show you this next slide. Yes, you can also disable the plugin in specific templates if you are using different ones for the same website. You can enable or disable the template, the plugin, sorry, in different pages. And if you're using a website like Virtual Mart, where you have pages with very a URL that's very long, and for example, it's just numbers because it's all about products. You can say I want all pages that start with product / and you can add a star, and we remove all the. You will disable the plugin or enable the plugin in the pages that are in the URL product. You can ask the plugin to disable MooTools. Sometimes templates upload MooTools, but it's not necessary, except for different cases. For example, if you have people editing articles in the front end, the MooTools is required, especially in Joomla 2.5. So the plugin is going to look into the code and see if really it's safe to remove it. and not have it loaded in the first place. And you you have a way of stripping lines of the code to make it a little shorter. Especially when you have the plugin deleting lines, then you get into a code where it's like a set of teeth with missing teeth. And then you also can get a report, which is very useful. I'm going to show you why. In my website, I'm going to turn. I have actually two websites. I have one created for Joomla 3 and for 2.5. But here, I'm going to go into jQuery Easy. Enable it. I have jQuery enabled. I want the 1.8 version. Here you can see that for versions that are higher than 1.8, you can add where you put your migrate file. You can set jQuery, but I don't need jQuery UI. I want the protocol to be HTTPSS, and my library to be minified. A save and close, or save. A save. What's happening in my website? Oh, something wrong. My gallery is gone. And you can see on the console, in the console, that there's a JavaScript error here in the script.js, which is actually a script that's written for the gallery. And it turns out that the error is on the $sign. Why? It shouldn't be happening because I made it sure that jQuery would be not conflicting with MooTools. Well, it turns out you will see in a couple of slides that some code was missing to encapsulate the jQuery calls from that module. Okay. Would it be nice to not have to worry about all this? For people who are developers, it's going to be a little more for you. In Joomla 2.5, there is a little work to do. I mean, if you want to make your extensions or modules jQuery friendly to all the other modules and applications, you need to provide a way to deactivate jQuery. I mean, it's a given. There's the minimum you can do for your extension. Turns out it'd be nice also if you can provide a local version of jQuery for people who are working offline and don't want to put any website online. And also provide a way of getting jQuery through a content delivery network. I always choose Google, but there's no. You can also choose Microsoft as a good one, jQuery as a good one. The reason is it's very interesting to use those because it makes the loading of the libraries a little faster. Usually those servers are optimized to get you those libraries at the fastest pace, and usually it's better optimized than your own server, unless you're really a dedicated one. And then a good thing to give the user, I mean the one who's building a website, to give him the way of choosing which version of jQuery he can use with your module or extension. So it's nice for everybody to know what version of jQuery extension we work with. In Joomla 3.1, well, you don't have anything to do. And you'll see why in a minute. At the code level, it's a little involved in Joomla 2.5. First, if you have let the user decide if he wants to load or not the jQuery library, you need to add a little code that will do that. I'll just show you little examples of loading jQuery from the media folder locally. You need to add your no conflict code. This is the only line that's needed for avoiding conflicts with MooTools. Or you can create a variable that you will call whatever you like and call jQuery. And then you will need to encapsulate all your jQuery code. If you use jQuery not conflict, then you use in your code this line, jQuery document, ready function with the $, or not. It depends if how the code is written inside. If you put the $, here, your code can use the $, like if there was no conflict with anything else. And then what the module that made errors after enabling jQuery didn't have is encapsulate the code into this function that let the website know that everything that's in here is code that's related to jQuery. In Joomla 3.1, much easier. Thank God there's something better. This line, you can put it anywhere in your code, in your module or your extension. It will load jQuery. It will add the code for no conflict. And it will actually add the migrate library for starting 3.2. If you need to use 1.9 or 10 of jQuery. It does that only locally, but when it does it only once. You can have 20 or 30 calls to that function, and it will only load jQuery once. Starting 3.2, you get jQuery 110. So for developers, it's going to be a little hard because they all have to have their extensions working with that version of jQuery. And it's easy to encapsulate code like with Joomla 2.5. This function, you put your jQuery code inside the parenthesis, or your function inside this little bit of code, and you're all set. That's all you have to do to add jQuery into your JavaScript. I'm probably going to put all that online. There is some links, well, jQuery, the jQuery framework. jQuery easy in the Joomla extension directory, my website, and I have a few articles where you can read about jQuery, and especially for Joomla 2.5. And there is an article I came across not long ago that talks about Joomla 3 and what's next and coming up for Joomla 3. So thank you very much. If you have questions, I'm very happy to answer.
On the one page where you're showing your configuration for your easy,
Yes.
You can. You said for any one page you can turn that on or off.
Yes.
But you can't configure it differently from one page to another, right? It's either on or off.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, once it's configured, the whole configuration is for every single page. Yeah, for the ones you have enabled in. Yes.
So is there any thought to? I've seen it done with other. It's more template than anything. But have you thought of doing like almost like a profile idea where you could assign certain plugin profiles to a given page? Like if you wanted to have like scripts that are ignored, like on a blog page, you have a lot of other stuff that gets loaded and maybe it strips something out, but that blog doesn't load on the home page or any other page of the site. So you might only want to apply certain scripts to get sucked out only on a certain area.
Yes, that would be a good idea actually. Yes, because right now you only have one choice. I mean, it's you enable it or disable it for the whole site. Yeah, and some
say ignore this or don't ignore it. So I'm wondering if you, because of the way this works, if it's got, you know, a list this long of ignore scripts that, you know, only 2 of them ever get looked at in a given page. Obviously, it still has to evaluate everything.
Yes, exactly.
So it could be a useful addition if it doesn't add extra overhead.
For
obviously.
Yes, for a very very big website, it could be a concern because then I've hit some problems a couple of times where the websites are very very big, and there's a point where jQuery easy makes your site faster. But after a certain point, if your site is way too complex and there's way too many changes to make on one single page, then it becomes slower.
Well, you have to work on that to begin with.
Yes. Well, yeah.
If you got that big enough site, you know, you're going to be in an area up here anyway that you need to be manually doing a lot of this stuff and checking it and making sure everything's working anyway. Yeah,
but I've been through very, very complex sites, and they asked for my help, and I was like, you have to start from scratch. I mean, this is too much. It's way too much code. You have to go through every single extension and see what you can do. You see also that for Joomla 2.5, I allow changes made to the backend too. It's been useful for a few people. I mean, as far as I know, they would to include Joomla into the backend, but it's not much relevant anymore for Joomla 3. So I can see the plugin to phase out a little bit with Joomla 3. Although Joomla 3 only allows you to load jQuery locally. So I can see some people who are still wanting to use jQuery, for example, or some other tool to load jQuery from a CDN.
So they may want to actually load jQuery 1.8 still, as opposed to 1.10, even in 3.2.
Yeah.
They may want to not call the framework.
Yeah, especially
and not have it available. They don't want to play with it yet.
Especially that a lot of templates are still not. I mean, a lot of templates are not using Bootstrap or anything like that, and jQuery can still be added by itself to the site. Well, I can see more and more websites using Bootstrap. When you use Bootstrap, you have jQuery loaded by default, but it's going to be more and more the case. But you still need a plugin like that, especially that extensions are written correctly. It's a lot of education actually at the developer level for use of jQuery in Joomla.
Do you know, does 3.2 remove all of the MooTools dependencies?
I've seen in the changes that it's the case.
Okay.
Yes.
So the back end totally and the front end both is
completely jQuery. They still have MooTools as a library. There's still a lot of that.
Available.
It's still available, but it's not.
It,
everything has been replaced with jQuery. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So jQuery UI is basically an extra JavaScript file with a bunch of animation support, fade in, fade out, all that kind of stuff, pop-up boxes, load windows.
Yeah, that adds a lot of UI elements to jQuery.
What's the download overhead for the UI?
Well, there's not much done actually. In Joomla 3, what they're only using the core of that library, which is very small.
Okay.
And they just use the sortable element.
So you can load in specifically the UI element that you need on individual UI.
Yes. No. Wait. Yes. Every developer is going to have to load its own extra, and especially if it uses also CSS, because there are themes associated with that.
You need jQuery. You're easy to check for the load-in of the extras.
Yeah, it's gonna have to think of some work. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think of something because it's much easier now to use jQuery in Joomla, but still you have a few things to do if you want to go into jQuery UI, for example.
Well, it's like Bootstrap, where you can go and configure your own version of Bootstrap, where you can pull out, I want X, Y, Z, I only want this.
Right.
Yes,
And
actually,
so you can pull that down.
I found it frustrating because wanting to use Bootstrap, for example, for a template I was creating, it turns out that all that was in Joomla was not available.
Yes, I was going to say, I found that Joomla has its own copy. The CSS files are the same, slightly modified, but the JavaScript, the Bootstrap JavaScript that's included with Joomla still is modified. You can't just swap out the standard JavaScript from Bootstrap because it still relied on, the thing that it got me on was tooltips.
Yes.
Still using MooTools for tooltips.
Seriously?
Yes. Now that might be out as
No, it's out. It wasn't on
but I know
this one.
as of
Look,
3
I have a.
weeks ago it
So
was.
you can't just swap out, so if you wanted to add some extra
So like
Bootstrap
so
stuff.
like I went and created my own template, and I went right to Bootstrap, and I was just going to CDN the Bootstrap files from a remote source. Well, it doesn't work because of the tooltip is not the same. Right?
So you can't load- you
I
can't
had to
load
load the
Joomla.
local version of bootstrap.js.
And then you also loaded yours, or you couldn't use yours?
Well, I couldn't, well, so the idea as I understood it with Bootstrap was what would be really nice is that I can load this CSS and JavaScript from some CDN, right? And then we can all use the same version. But in order to make everything compatible, yeah, they've had to tweak it a little bit here and there to make it work.
Well, they've
So
also.
I can't just load the Bootstrap copy from bootstrap.com. I have to load the local version because there's something modified in there with tooltip.
It's also when you start using icons. Also, you get into the fact that
Different icons.
there's different icons.
Echo Moon is one they include with Joomla, I think.
Yes.
They give you a library.
They do. So that's
Yeah.
got more icons.
Yeah, but it's a limited library that's limited to what Joomla needs. So if you need extra icons for your own,
Yeah,
then you have to do it. Yeah.
But I know with like Bootstrap, it's, or with a lot of them in general, it's kind of, they had to settle on a version. To include it in the core, they had to settle on a version, so in theory, 3.2 may actually have a different version of Bootstrap actually included in it whenever they release it.
What I don't like about having jQuery into Joomla or MooTools for that matter is that you're stuck with the version that works with the framework. So for a long time, people were complaining about MooTools because they couldn't update their extensions with new functionalities. Yeah, I mean for a very long time, and MooTools was not upgraded in Joomla, but people wanted to use new features that were in the new MooTools libraries, but they were stuck with what Joomla offered. And I'm afraid I'm hoping it's not going to happen with jQuery. It seems like they've been pretty good about it since they used the latest jQuery version now in 3.2. So.
I think that was the idea I had heard, was that the newer releases would look at upgrading the versions of jQuery, Bootstrap, stuff like that when the new version came out, so that you could get some of the newer stuff that may have come out, as long as it doesn't break the backwards compatibility.
Yes.
By adding the new stuff, if it breaks something in the old stuff, they can't do it. So I think that's what they're shooting for, is being able to add some of the new stuff, as long as it doesn't break something that already exists that people built on in 3. So like 4, they may go to jQuery 2 altogether and say, sorry, we're going to 2.
Well, I realized, I found out that Internet Explorer 8, for example, is already not taken care of by Google anymore.
Yeah. What's the market share for 8? Well, it's dwindling fast, right?
Yeah, 7 is still out there, but it's pretty much gone.
7.
IT departments have finally upgraded their XP machines from.
7 is less than 1% of every web.
But XP is like end of life next year, right? Windows XP and.
Windows XP can still be upgraded to Internet Explorer 8.
Yeah, that's.
So that's the low we should shoot for.
Yeah.
Lowest you should shoot for. Yeah.
It's still pretty.
9
I
is the
charge
lowest.
extra for 8.
You charge extra for 8?
I started not taking care of Internet Explorer 7 the last week or so. I finally decided it's time to move on.
I was like way ahead of that curve when it was 6. And we still need it, and I'm like, no.
Yes.
You can pay extra for that.
There you go.
Yeah, and you have to focus a lot now into the mobile world, because websites are used extensively now through phones and tablets.
Yeah, and then most of them will support JavaScript pretty easily. So
Yes.
that gives a little more. Used to be your site died when you went to a phone. You didn't have any of the nice fancy stuff to do with JavaScript, but now that most of the smartphones handle it,
Yeah, the browsers are pretty sophisticated now. So.
What do you guys feel about, like we talked a lot about locally embedded jQuery files versus external libraries. I've always been kind of the opinion that I'd rather not rely upon an external data source in case that data source goes away, or, if my site's going to be down, it's going to be down.
It's always a concern, but I decided that Google was probably, or Microsoft are probably reliable sources.
It does. But
It does.
I would say on a practical level, I've just found that I totally get your concerns, and I had concerns too, but it's one of those things like when I started using Unix and realized like, oh, this machine isn't going to crash. Like Windows and Mac that I'm so used to, and it's the same kind of thing where it's like, oh, it's not as scary as I thought it would be. It might go down sometimes, but it's Google. It'll be back up.
Yeah, exactly.
More about performance than it going down.
Yeah.
Well,
It's actually much faster.
It's faster.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
But what is faster, or what is potentially better, to store everything remotely on the super fast, Google CDN, or to have a Joomla site that is properly CDN'd itself, where you have all those.
I've never done that.
It depends on what where your site is located.
SiteGround has a one-click button now. Turn on the CDN for your Joomla site. It's just
Pretty cool.
it forces all traffic through www. But
I will say, having like loaded both ways, if you load it locally, if you've got like the whole jQuery file uncompressed, it's maybe like 100K or something like that, and it'll take a few seconds. That same file through Google is a few microseconds. It's crazy how fast it is.
It's really optimized for it. Yeah.
Exactly.
It probably
That's the other thing. Yeah. All the websites you go through, and if they're using already Google CDN, your file is already cached, so you don't have to do anything.
Because most people are using whatever the latest is, and the local cable company probably has it cached on their machine.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to go to Google to get to it. So there's probably several places you can find it.
I feel like it's a wake up someday.
Is there a
Now I got to pay $60 a month for this.
Excuse me?
Is there a way to
They're
do a
gonna monetize
fallback?
this at some point.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So if you make the call to Google and it fails, is there a way to have a small piece of code or something to check and make sure it's there? And then if it isn't, you load it locally.
There's a way of doing it with PHP. You can check if you have
It would be like a man
Yes.
in the middle and say,
Yeah.
is it available? Deliver it. If not, grab the local code.
I don't know if we've.
Now the question is how much more time that would
Yeah,
add to
that's
it.
what I have no idea. But it's a good. I would like to try
it's,
that.
it's just like,
Yes.
you know, you look at redundancy for stuff, and if you're worried about
Yeah.
that, maybe you do that.
Mm-mm.
I wanted
Yes.
to ask about your plugin, just from a kind of a extension and plugin development standpoint. I'm just kind of starting to dabble in it, and I understand that it's probably connected to a Joomla system event that causes it to fire off.
Yes.
And then, which system event is it connected
There are three,
on
all of
the
three.
vendor, or-
The three major ones I can show you.
Is it for compile head?
No. Okay, I'll get that.
So you
Okay,
have to plug in-
don't get scared.
Yeah, don't get scared.
You're like tying the system, there's like different points as Joomla is building a page, and at any of those points, it's called, each point is called an event, and you can like
Correct.
insert commands, like that's what plugins do. They go in and they do certain things, do certain.
It's like the one, like with a lot of the content plugins, it's going to be like on
Right,
content,
yeah.
on content prepared.
On after route.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to use on after route. That will decide what is going to be, what versions are going to be used later on. Okay, I'm going down the road. On before render is where I reorder all my JavaScript libraries.
Now, I have built something similar, and in the 2 series they introduced on before compile head, which I believe fires immediately before your head element is rendered,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where
And yeah, and then you have your on after render is when everything is already on your page and you replace the last.
So you gotta
Oh, so you like parse through it and then you swap out?
Yes, I make placeholders in the first function. I have placeholders for everything is where it's going to be, and I replace it in the after render.
Okay.
So you get the rendering of it because then you know what's actually in there.
Mm.
Then you go through and say strip, put this in, replace this, and then I'm done.
Yeah, and then if you ever look into the code when you download it, you have a few commands that help. A few comments here and there. For example, excuse me because I know it's confusing when you go through it. Here, for example, let's say at this point jQuery and MooTools library are loaded in the wrong order. And that's on before render is where all your JavaScript libraries are. They are not available in the previous event.
Has the events changed between Joomla 2.5 and 3, or is it pretty much still the same?
It's pretty much the same. They added a few ones, but especially for content, not for system, for content. I've seen for content, but I'm not. I didn't see all of it.
new events for UCM.
I don't think UCM wasn't common for.
I don't know.
It's in tagging.
It's in tagging. I've used it.
Oh, really?
Cool, yeah.
Yeah, the UCM was built around an old model of UCM.
That's a
The
universal.
sorry, the
content
tagging
model.
was built around an old version of the UCM when Elin built it. She built it around the idea of UCM and introduced it in 3.1. So it's there. It may not stay that way when they go to 4.0, but it's in there.
Yeah, I didn't show you something. I wanted to show you the reporting tool. When you have jQuery loaded, enabled on your site, if you go down, it will tell you how many libraries it has removed, and tell you which is added. The script is empty. Well, there's not much done on this page, but you can have like a huge page of everything that's been done on your page, and it's really helpful if you want to find out
When
what's.
you turn on reporting, like turning on errors, kind of.
Like turning on debug is.
No, actually, it's an advanced option. Show report.
Okay, so you can turn it on and off.
Yeah, on and off.
But it's like running a debug script when it shows up at the end of the page and tells you everything that happened on the page.
Yeah, well, I wanted to add that because it's even for me, it's very useful to know exactly what your plugin does.
Yeah. True. Without having to go debug.
Yeah, and there's a few links also for help. You also have the themes for jQuery UI that are available. But it's been helped. It has helped a lot of people. Thank God. But I wish there was not that big of a mess to start with. So.
I'm sure people are still including their own versions of jQuery, even though they shouldn't.
In Joomla 3, I haven't seen many differences yet. The K2 is doing it right.
Like what is Joomla telling extension developers that they should be doing? They should be using the local library in Joomla 3?
You have to dig very deep to find this kind of information,
Okay.
but there is no required practice. No. They should have a document for required.
They should actually have it as part of.
I guess a best practice, or what
yes.
would deal in.
In theory, they would say that you should use what you can as a board. Right. Don't include your own unless you absolutely have to.
And don't link out to the.
And don't link and link to the local one. Use the local one unless you really want to avoid it altogether. If you want to do your CDN, you can do it, but don't include the Joomla core at that point. But it's still going to potentially get included by somebody else anyway. So that's part of the problem. So you really need to check yourself in your own code. If you're going to include your own, you still need to check and see if it's already loaded.
jQuery easy to do.
Yeah.
You really have to, when you create an extension, you really have to dig into the API of Joomla to make sure that it's not already existing. Because I've had surprises a few times. My own color picker, and then realized that it was already there.
Yeah, they throw things in for you,
so.
Trying to help, and they don't really document it. So,
yeah.
Definitely.
It's okay when you build it yourself, you know
how
to upgrade it, where to get to it.
How long does it take you to develop a plugin like this? I know it's probably been.
It's been evolved. I started with just the basic settings. It evolved because people were asking for it. I had a lot of people, it would be nice if you could do that and this and that. So it's been 2 years since I created the plugin, and I haven't done much development for the last 6 months, just updates and bug fixes.
And before this, you had been developing other Joomla extensions.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a lot. I don't know what I always have a hard time to know what would be. Would you know what trombinoscope is? A trombinoscope. It's a French word. It's and I've never found an equivalent in English. It's like when you have a school book, a yearbook, with all the pictures of people in just one page. I have a component that does this kind of stuff. With contacts, Joomla contacts. I have some module that also does showing a latest news. A better module than the Joomla one. I mean, more sophisticated. Bring up your website. Go ahead. Okay. All right.
Bring it up.
Oops, that was in here.
Yeah, that's your site as far as what the computer understands.
But it's not. It's not a Joomla 3 site yet. Okay. I should have reversed my screens. I keep going the way. Okay. You have a very interesting part is the developers corner. There are a lot of articles about jQuery, about different things in the Joomla world. So you have case studies and examples. I have code examples. And in the download part, I created some templates. You have different templates. One is responsive and works with Joomla 3. I've created article details. Is the element that shows this kind of stuff. So you have a date, for example, instead of having it's like you have a header for every article you can show on your Joomla site, without going through with K2 or anything that's more sophisticated.
Makes a better header than what actually shows up.
Yeah, actually, you can decide every wording. It's a plugin. It's all internationalized too, so it's very good for that. But you can have your own wording and your icons. I have created a reCAPTCHA module, a plugin actually, that replaces the reCAPTCHA from Joomla with the bare one from Google without all the theming. So you can actually theme your reCAPTCHA yourself, so that it fits your designs. jQuery Easy, which is the first one I've ever created. I don't remember how many downloads. Let's see. The 5. People complaining because they have to log into my site. Yeah.
Yeah, what is this a free plugin? Does this cost?
It's free.
Yeah.
You have the nerve to not know.
108,000 downloads. Just for 2.5.
Just for 2.5.
Just for 2.5, yeah.
Or 1.5 even. Nice.
It's been downloaded a lot. I mean, I have 200 new users every day on my site.
You should charge 99 cents.
Well, yeah, my parents were like, why didn't you have people pay for it? Well, the thing is that I made my forum was like loaded with spam, and I had more and more people asking questions, so I had to make my forum commercial. So it's like $4, but what did I want to show again? Yes. So for the trombinoscope, I have a free version and I have a commercial version. Commercial versions add much more functionality, and it's not only a module, but it's also a full page component.
Can you show us an example of that?
Yeah. What can I show? Well, I can show you my. Okay, this is a slider I created also. You can. Yeah, it's like a regular jQuery slider, but it actually uses the article's content. You have latest news here, article details here. With contacts, you can be very creative. For example, I created a list of animals that are endangered. These are all the categories they fall into. So you can show them in a specific, with a specific theme. That's the module version of it. You can have the links of the category link to the actual category, or you can have it linked to another part of this menu item.
The entries of the page.
Excuse me?
So you can have it do either the description of the category or a page showing all the animals in that region.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And then it's also tag. I added the tagging into it so that you now have contacts who can be from different categories. That's with just animals, but you can do, if I go to another one, same component. Works for business. So this one has no theme. You can have you can just see the supervisor, for example. And you have also indexes. Highlighted the ones that are the letters. You can sort the contacts for different things. You can search if you have a long list of contacts. You can print that list. So that's what the terminoscope does mainly. This is so these are using the templates I've created also. So these are
based or 960, I guess 960 responsive is the framework.
yes, that's 960 grid. These templates are pretty simple because they have all the functionality for mobile site and everything. It's just they are not having much of a design, so that it's more targeted to people who develop more than the designers, so that you have something to start with and base your design on. For example, this website, I mean, this is the look you get. But I can show you. See, that's another one that I created with the terminoscope. This is the CAPTCHA.
Now, is that CAPTCHA the standard Google thing producing it now, or is that a choice you can make?
No, it's Google.
So they can give you either look at the words or look at the numbers.
Yeah, and then you can decide if you want an audio challenge. All that stuff. I made all the options available through that plugin.
Okay.
It's just a matter of skinning it.
Yeah, because I started seeing these number reCAPTCHAs showing up, and reCAPTCHA had always been words previously.
Yeah, it's Google decided to change the way they do it.
Start throwing it in.
Yeah.
Instead of the words.
Yes.
They're just doing numbers.
Have you seen house
Yeah.
numbers?
Yes, I've seen those.
They do it more and more.
Ah.
Yeah, they actually phasing out more and more, so that it's like it's a two-way thing, because well, both are images, but it turns out that and as I found out, you can still get spam having with the reCAPTCHA.
Yeah.
And this makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, because they're actually using pictures of real house numbers and
Yes.
numbers that are actually in a real picture.
Not computer generated.
Not computer generated, as opposed to the computer generated numbers there.
Yes.
So they're
Exactly.
actually phasing it out, which is okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering when that started happening, and I'd ask another developer, well, are you guys going to add that? He said, well, we shouldn't have to do anything because it's Google doing it, not us. So I wasn't sure what was going on. They had started popping up recently.
I've also created a few components that is kind of how can I explain? When you create a website and you want to have placeholders where you're not going to put stuff for your design, but you don't have the content yet, just use a wireframe and then you can just add fake content and in your placeholders. That's about it. But I wanted to show you a website that uses the, like for example, this one. This website has been created with one of the templates, and so it's just a matter of skinning a little bit, and you have to know a little HTML and CSS, and that's it.
All right, one last question.
Okay, I got one. Look, one of the things that I liked about the parameters for your plugin, maybe we could take a look at that, is the nice documentation and the help and things like that. I've been playing around with parameters for templates, and I know that those are defined in XML files, and I would imagine that's the same thing for plugins. But I cannot frickin' for the life of me figure out how to just insert some like graphics and like just help documentation or things like that. Could you show me what your XML file looks like so I can see like how you render that content into the?
Yes.
I could only get like form elements to appear. And I want to add like some extra
it's in fields. I have, for example, help.
Oh,
I guess the access
So these custom fields.
It's a custom field.
Oh, you're doing custom.
I put it in get label here, and I call that default here. This is where my help is.
Okay.
so you've created a custom
Custom
help
field
field
is whatever you want.
that you then call from the XML file and say define this field, and then it runs this PHP file and generates all this stuff for you.
That was driving me
Oh, cool.
crazy. Thank you.
The other thing that I've done is use a localization as like a placeholder,
Okay.
and then define your localization with the actual HTML.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And the localization will pull in a chunk of HTML, won't strip anything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've tried and learned a lot from other extensions or Joomla code, and I've kept what works for me.
Yeah.
That's the standard way.
That's the way to do it. That's the way I think most people.
That's the
are
standard
doing
way you program. You start with some code you almost understand and throw away what gets you.
it. Yeah, or you look at somebody else's code and say, "Oh, I understand that."
Yeah, and I want that too.
Well, somebody else has already done it, and it's right.
Yes.
It's a good practice. Why reinvent the wheel, like we were talking about earlier? You know, try to at least figure out if they've already done it. You don't have to throw away the concept. You got the concept. You don't copy the code exactly, but hey, there you go.
Usually you skim the code or you make it better.
Make it better or make it your own. So
And make it your own, yeah.
Something it's like, oh, you stole my code, but you know.
Back in the 90s, before most of you were born, I had the dubious pleasure of being a project leader at one of the insurance companies. And we counted. They had 972 different estate routines across the insurance lines, written in 3 different languages, all of which were answering one of 2 questions. What day is it today? Or what day will it be 3 months from today?
That's hilarious.
So we sat down, we said, what is the absolute best one of these? And oh, it's stolen code in BASIC that we got from some other insurance company, that'll work. And because for Y2K compliance, we had to verify each and every bloody model, right? So we got it down to 1, and then we verified the 1.
There you go.
And we also sent a check to the other company.
That's a good idea.
Is your copyrighted code with 15 grand make you happier? Yeah, done.
Sure.
Sure. Paid for itself in man hours.
Okay. Well, I think with that, we'll wrap it up.